Chapter 17 of Esthajnalcsillag Morningstar. At noontime, all the church bells rang out loudly in Hungary, from the smallest tiny little church bell tower to the biggest, most elaborate cathedrals. Whether they are Catholic or Protestant churches, all ring out at the same time. On this day, in the bright sunshine of November 20th, 1956, the church bells tolled out at noontime as usual. Even on that remote farm where the family had taken refuge, the sound of the bells could be heard loud and clear coming across the frozen fields and swamplands. Morningstar's father went out to the yard from the barn as he heard a horse-drawn wagon coming into the yard. There were some whisperings and some louder talk, but Morningstar could not make out what was being said. The little girl, together with the rest of her family, was ordered to remain hidden in the barn and to be silent. By now, Morningstar had enough of being silent. Morningstar did realize that they were in great danger and the life of the whole family depended on following instructions quickly and precisely. Morningstar's father came back to the barn and said it was time for the family to leave this farm. Morningstar's mother, questioning her husband, and asked if he was serious about putting their lives in danger by trying to cross the border in broad daylight at high noon. Morningstar's father replied that he would stand for no more questions and that the family must be ready to leave in 5 minutes. When the family finally did emerge from the dim light of the barn into the bright, sparkling sunshine of noonday, Morningstar felt happy and relieved that perhaps now they would be returning home to her beloved Siófok. Surely her father did not want to attempt to escape in such a bright light and with so many extra border patrols on duty. Morningstar's father told the family to climb up onto the horse-drawn wagon. This is when Morningstar first saw that there were 4 other adults on the wagon already. Morningstar's family climbed on the wagon. The other adults helped her mother and the children up to the wagon seats. They were all covered with blankets to keep warm. Despite the wonderful sunshine, the air was bitter cold and a harsh wind also began to blow. One of the adult males on the wagon mentioned that the weather forecast expected heavy snowstorms for the night. So the group must hurry to cross the border before darkness came, or they would be lost in the blizzard. Morningstar realized that the family was not going back to their home, but is continuing with the escape attempt from her beloved Hungary. This made Morningstar angry, and again she was considering the offer of the owner of the farm to stay with them, even without the permission of her parents if need be. Morningstar's little sister began her crying again. This made the rest of the adults reluctant to want to travel with the crying baby. They said that the child would bring the border patrol on them. Morningstar's father said that maybe the crying child would stop the soldiers from firing on them. So the entourage began their journey to freedom on a horse-drawn wagon. The rays of the sun seemed to caress and warm our little girl's tired, aching body, and she fell into a half slumber-like state. Finally, the little girl's baby sister also stopped crying and was looking around curiously at the new sights of the frozen fields sparkling in the noonday sun. A little while has passed and the wagon stopped. The driver of the horse-drawn wagon told the group to look behind the line of trees at the side of the road, and they would see the border between Austria and Hungary, just on the other side of the creek that was running there. The adults went to look, and they said it was true. The border was there, together with border patrols, machine guns, tanks, and dogs. The driver of the wagon said the border patrol would be eating lunch soon. And since they are not expecting any refugees to try and cross the border at high noon, the group could sneak to the creek. There, on the banks of the creek, they would find a flat-bottomed little boat. Once they're in the boat and halfway across the creek, then the group would be safe because they would have crossed the border already. This theory sounded logical to the adults in the group, and they each paid whatever they could to the driver of the horse-drawn wagon. The wagon turned around and disappeared in the turn of the road. Again, Morningstar's family was left alone at the edge of the border with no guide and no guarantee for a safe crossing of the border. By now, almost all of Morningstar's father's money was gone. The family had not eaten since the light breakfast at dawn, and it was bitter cold. The sun was beginning to go away as the clouds grew heavier and the sky gray. Lightly, it began to snow, but there were no heavy winds to contend with anymore. No winds also meant that the sound of this little group as they were making their way to the border would not be carried either so far or so fast. The watchdogs began to bark as the group got closer to the banks of the creek and to freedom. Morningstar's father was the first to reach one of the flat-bottomed little boats in the creek. He tested it and saw that it was all right. The boats did not freeze into the water. The family of Morningstar got into one of the boats, and the other adults from the group into the second little boat. Morningstar's father was told that after the group crossed the creek, just to leave the boats tied up on the other side of the creek and don't worry about getting them back to the Hungarian side. As soon as everyone was in the boats, the first group of 4 adults started to paddle across the shallow creek to the Austrian side. The border patrols noticed them and gave a round of machine gun fire after them. One or more of them became wounded. Morningstar could hear their cries of pain, but she could not see them. Morningstar's family was hunched down in the boat and hiding under a large weeping willow tree. It was almost dark already. From the heavy black clouds, the snow began to fall in earnest. Then Morningstar saw a Hungarian flag being flown on the other side of the creek and somebody singing the national anthem of Hungary. The national anthem of Hungary began with the words, God bless the Hungarian. And at that moment, everyone who was there on the border needed God's blessing and help. The gunfire died down, and the border became quiet again. This was the time that Morningstar's father decided for the family to make their break toward freedom. As the father started to push the boat away from the shore, 4 border patrolling soldiers appeared with their machine guns aimed at Morningstar's father. No one made a sound, not even Morningstar's baby sister. The very thing that the family has been afraid of for the past 2 days has come to be. They were caught trying to escape from Hungary. Morningstar's father made a feeble attempt at talking with the soldiers, and then a miracle happened. The soldiers lowered their weapons and talked with Morningstar's father. Then the father came to the boat and told Morningstar's mother to remove all her jewelry and watch, even her wedding band, and hand them over to him. Morningstar's father dug out every filler that he had left in his pocket and all the meager pieces of jewelry and wristwatches and handed them to the soldiers. They seemed to be satisfied with their prey and told Morningstar's father that they would turn their backs for 10 minutes because they have to go and check on their dogs. After the 10 minutes, the soldiers still see Morningstar's family. Then they will shoot everyone except for the two little girls. Morningstar's brother, at the age of 12, counted as a counter-revolutionist, and the law of the land at that time was to shoot them all. Morningstar tried to shield her baby sister from the eye of the soldiers, and she covered the little girl's mouth gently with her hand. Morningstar's father pushed the boat toward the middle of the creek. The family was almost in safety when they heard the sounds of machine gun fire directed at them. However, the bullets seemed to be aimed above the family's heads. Hurriedly, the family, upon reaching the other banks of the creek, got out of the boat, tied the boat up, and then tried to climb the steep bank of the creek to safety. Even the other side of the creek was still Hungarian territory for about 1 meter, so they had to clear the banks of the creek rapidly. The shooting continued all the while the family was climbing the banks of the creek, and the shouting for them to stop in the name of the law. Morningstar's father told the family not to turn around, no matter what happened. They were almost within inches of safety and freedom. Again, more machine gun fire, but this time, for lower down on the creek it seemed, and another singing of the Hungarian anthem, this time standing on the banks of the creek and in safety. The family of Morningstar joined in singing the Hungarian national anthem as a way of saying goodbye to their beloved homeland forever. It was late afternoon and dark already when Morningstar's family reached safety across the Austrian border. The small, tired, cold, hungry, and totally lost family was standing at the border, 1 foot in their beloved country of Hungary, that they were forced to flee, and 1 foot in the land of Austria and the road to freedom. They could still hear machine gun shots being fired into the air and at them. The border guards were pretending to shoot at the refugees so that they would not be shot for letting anyone cross the border, for bribes or just for the sake of honor and humanity. Most of the Hungarian soldiers and border patrol guards refused to shoot at their own people. A number of the platoons joined a small group of refugees and fled the country with them. Of course, these soldiers knew that their families would be punished for their acts of desertion. So only the ones who had no immediate family were bound to be the first ones to go across. A few more uncertain steps, and now Morningstar and her family had crossed the border and were officially on Austrian land. With these few meters, their whole life, as they had known up to that moment, had ended. The lights began to flicker on, and a full moon was out in the bitter cold of the night. But at least the wind had stopped. Down further by the creek, Morningstar could see a number of moving figures here and there, but she could not make out whether they were Hungarian, Austrian, or Russians. Again, Morningstar was burning with fever, so the cold did not really bother her. Morningstar's baby sister must have reached the point of exhaustion and finally gave up crying. The family began to walk away from the border. Morningstar's father said that it was not safe to remain there because some of the Russian soldiers can't seem to be able to read a map, and they were looking for deserters from the army who fled across the border in full military gear, arms and all. Now, these soldiers, armed to the teeth, did cause some concern for the Austrian authorities because they just could not figure out what would a whole platoon of fully armed Hungarian soldiers want in Austria. To want to attack Austria was a ridiculous thought. The usual procedure for these soldiers was to order them to undress completely, just in case they had hidden explosives or other material on them, and then they were loaded up on a truck and taken to a military compound, apart from the rest of the refugees who were received by the Red Cross. As more and more machine gun shots were heard, Morningstar's father said that a number of soldiers must have crossed the border, and that is who the Border Patrol now, made up mostly of Russian soldiers, was hunting after. The Russian soldiers stepped over the boundary and were hunting the deserters on Austrian territory. The fact that the family of Morningstar had to reach safety was more urgent than ever because the Russian soldiers, in their anger at being duped, would not spare this family either, even if they were already safely on Austrian territory. The sound of people yelling and machine gun fire came closer and closer. Morningstar could see the fire from the guns as they were shot. People screamed out in pain, and some begged for mercy. But the answer to all of this was more machine gun fire. Then an interesting thing happened. Morningstar saw vehicles, the likes of which she had not seen in Hungary, where mostly she saw Russian military vehicles. These armored vehicles were shooting at the Russians for a change, and not at the Hungarians. All of this, Morningstar thought, was rather odd. She was getting used to being shot at. The appearance of the armored cars did seem to impress the Russian soldiers also, because it seemed as if they were heading back to the banks of the creek and getting into the small boats they used to cross the creek. It would have seemed logical to Morningstar that they would retreat under the cover of darkness, but no. These Russian soldiers decided to light lanterns and flashlights so they can see their way back to Hungary. The Austrian troops, or Morningstar presumed that's who they were, did not go after the intruders. Morningstar deduced that they were just happy to get rid of them. This was more a show of strength on the part of the Austrian Border Patrol rather than an attack on Russian troops. The border of Austria was violated by the Russians, and Austria wanted them to understand that they would not stand for such a thing. The appearance of the Austrian military came and went within a matter of minutes. Again, silence and darkness fell on the fields where the family of Morningstar found themselves. In the far off distance, the headlights of a vehicle could be seen. The family started to walk towards it. Morningstar was very weak by this time. The fever had taken a lot of her strength, and the pain was constant from her oozing boil. Each step that she took rubbed the raw wound open more. She was told by her father that soon it would be over. And finally, more than 24 hours after leaving their home, the family would be safe and sound. The vehicle turned out to be a Red Cross truck that was riding up and down the border looking for refugees. Morningstar was only half conscious of what was going on by that time. But in a little while, strong arms lifted the little girl onto the back of the truck, and warm covers were put on her. Even in the icy cold of the night, the truck seemed very warm, and Morningstar fell asleep instantly. When she awoke, it was in a Red Cross tent with a nurse and a doctor standing over her. Morningstar's boil was clean and fresh dressing was put over it. She was given medicine for the pain and fever. Also, she was given clean underclothes, as was her other siblings. Then Morningstar had one of the most delicious meals that she ever remembered having in her short young life. This was a cup of hot, sweet tea and a big slice of fresh bread with margarine on it. Morningstar, who had butter bread daily for tea, could not recall when she ever tasted anything so good. The warmth of the tea seemed to melt her frozen body, and her body came back to life. The effects of the medicine were soon felt by Morningstar, and then she was given another cup of sweet tea. Morningstar was placed in a corner of the tent with her family, close to where the doctor could keep an eye on her. She was not out of the woods yet. The possibility of blood poisoning was still very high, and there were not enough IVs to go around. An Austrian soldier came to ask for the names and other information on the family. Morningstar's father answered all his questions, showing him the birth certificates and other legal documents to prove who everybody is in the family. A Red Cross worker came over to the family and placed a name tag on everybody. Morningstar looked down on her coat, and it said that her name is Elizabeth. She started to protest that she's not Elizabeth but Morningstar. The Red Cross worker did not speak Hungarian, but Morningstar's father, of course, spoke German. The Red Cross worker told Morningstar's father to explain to the family what she is about to say. Then the worker continued to tell all that from that moment on, they were no longer considered Hungarians, that they have no country and no homeland. Their names and their nationality have ceased to exist. By leaving their country, they have chosen to become refugees with no rights and nothing but the clothes on their backs. In Hungary, those that have left, either by emigrating or by fleeing across the border, illegally were considered dead. Their families were not allowed to ever mention their names again, nor try and take up any communications with them. Therefore, Morningstar, who was born in Siófok on that warm, gentle June morning in 1945, had ceased to exist on a cold, dark, bitter November evening in 1956. End of chapter 17.